Next speaker, Senator LeBeau.
Don't start that clock yet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the chairs and the ranking members of GA&E for raising SJR 71, which I've come to speak to you about today. I want to laud you for your vision and your willingness to think anew about the structure of our state government, particularly about the structure of the legislative branch. I thank you for taking the concepts of proposed Bill 611 and incorporating them into SJR 71. I begin with a premise. Now is the time for new ideas. Now is the time for bold ideas. Now is the time to change the way we're doing things to make our actions more efficient, more effective, and more accountable. It is in this spirit that I recommend to you a new legislative structure based not on two redundant houses, but simply on one accountable chamber, in short, a unicameral legislature. A unicameral legislature will be more efficient. It could and should save money for our taxpayers. If, as the bill proposes, there were 60 representatives, each reflecting approximately 60,000 residents, that would reduce the number of total representatives from the current 187 to the proposed 60, yielding more than a 2/3 reduction in the number of total positions. This would allow the 60 representatives to become full-time, draw a decent salary, and still save the state an appreciable amount of dollars in the salary account. Likewise, on the legislative staff side of the equation, there could be a strengthening of the current legislative offices, including perhaps a general accounting office or perhaps an inspector general's office or both, while at the same time saving total expenditures. The net result would be a stronger and more effective legislature, one that can both better predict and evaluate the results of its actions. A unicameral legislature would, I believe, be more accountable and efficient with only one body responsible for legislation. The current practice of bills, quote, dying on the calendar, unquote, could end. Likewise, our committee work would become more important. There would be less of a tendency to move along a bill as a, quote, work in progress. Votes in committee would have much more meaning. With only one chamber, there would be no blaming the other chamber if, as today, a bill passes one chamber and is not taken up in the other. Final action would indeed be final action. This greater accountability would be even more so if you incorporate my suggestion for the legislature to become full-time. This change would vastly strengthen the oversight function of the legislature, which today is weak and understaffed. It would allow for legislators to gain greater knowledge in their areas of cognizance and become an expert in that area. Along with a 4-year term, a unicameral legislature would end the wasteful practice of the yearly deluge of thousands of bills that are introduced with ultimately only a few hundred bills being passed. It would be a strong attempt at improving the quality of both the process of the legislation and the product of our deliberations. Let me try to wrap up. I would also recommend, although not part of this bill, that we look at cutting the number of committees that the legislature has in half. Particularly, we have a finance and appropriation. Like an example would be we have a finance and appropriation committee, both dealing with money, but having a hard time sometimes getting together. That should be one committee, a Ways and Means committee. Unicameral legislature is not a familiar idea. However, there are many countries. Nebraska is one state that has it. New Zealand, Iceland, Slovenia, Sweden, Denmark. There are a variety of countries around the world that have, and if you think about our local governments, they are almost all unicameral legislatures, as our county governments, some of which are larger than the state of Connecticut, around the country are almost all unicameral legislatures. So I ask you today, as I have had the vision and the courage to bring this bill up before this committee, to have the further vision and the courage to allow the statewide electorate to vote on this proposal and to trust in their judgment as they voice their opinion. One final thought, we have a government in which Representative Spallone, Mr. Chairman, is co-chairing the Commission on Government Reorganization. This would be, I think, an appropriate idea to send in front of that commission also.
Thank you very much, Senator. Are there any questions for Senator LeBeau? Representative Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Senator. Thank you very much. It's an intriguing and provocative idea. Have you had the chance much to study much in maybe some other countries, Western Europe, South America, all over the world for that matter, whether there are upper and lower chambers and really what's been the practical impact, and are you aware of any real unbiased analysis and studies of these. We have our own history in this country, and maybe other countries have other reasons, unique reasons perhaps, for what I'll call upper and lower chambers, to use that expression. But what are some of the practices, and what are some of the consequences of this? Is to the extent, I know it's a big, broad question, but I wonder if you have any information in that regard.
Let me give you an example of what happened in Nebraska in 1937 when it passed its unicameral legislature bill. The following year, they had half the bills and introduced, and they passed almost as many as they had the prior year. They also did it at about half the cost. That's one specific thing. I know that unicamerals, I don't think there is, and I'm not sure it's possible to do an objective study. I do have a lot of information which I'd be glad to supply to the Committee on Research that I've done in unicameral legislatures, and if you'd like that, I could supply it. But there are unicams virtually all over the world. Costa Rica, in South America, Central America, there's Uganda in Africa. Europe has a good number of them. Iceland, kind of northern belt, Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, Slovenia, Hungary. So there are a variety of places that have adopted this. But I think if you think about why we have two houses of the legislature, it's really following, in Connecticut, it's really following the federal example. And the federal example, if you go look at federal, what that's all about was kind of the big state, small state compromise proposed by our own Roger Sherman from Connecticut to kind of figure out how to satisfy the small states and in terms of their power within a legislature and satisfy the large states to ensure that they had, in a sense, more power because they had more people. But how does that apply to Connecticut? It just doesn't fit. But we kind of, I think, adopted that, and also because of the historical example of the House of Lords and the House of Commons in Great Britain. And that has really become more and more of a unicameral legislature because the House of Lords really has no power these days. So, I mean, I think we're kind of stuck in history here. And frankly, I think we're at a time where people are asking to change history and to say, let's look at things anew, let's look at things fresh, and let's try to come up with better ways of doing things.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Representative Hetherington.
Thank you, Senator. I think this is a very creative idea, and I think you're certainly on to something. The legislature is too large, for one thing. The House certainly is too large. How would you feel about a step to reduce the size of the legislature in advance of making it a unicameral legislature? Would that be a step in the right direction, you think?
No.
No.
Because I think that would be the step, and that would be the only step that would be taken. Okay. And I think the unicameral legislature is really where you really get the efficiencies and the accountability and the effectiveness. Mm-hmm. There'd certainly be some saving just by reducing the numbers. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, there could be some significant savings here in dollars. Because we each have a pension. If you're going from 187 to 60, that's, do the math, 127 pensions
right.
that we're not going to have in the future, or health care costs, and on and on. So I'm afraid of that half step, representative, being the final step. And that's why yes, I think it's appealing, but I think that that would be it.
The other thing I was going to ask about, you just answered. I mean, I think England now effectively is a unicameral legislature. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Couple of questions. In reducing the size of the legislature from 187 senators and representatives to 60 senators or representatives, or whatever we end up calling them, right now in the House, each district is approximately 25,000 persons.
22,005.
Yes, even better, 22,500. And that's a number that allows members to be able to, in the House side, answer many of the phone calls directly, see people, in their district, in the supermarket and the transfer station, to answer many of the emails directly. Do you think something would be lost by eliminating the small districts where people have a sense that that representative in the House side, and the Senate has this interaction too, but your districts have 100,000 people. Don't you think something might be lost by not having that kind of close connection?
Honestly, yes. Obviously, there are less people out there. However, if we went to a full-time legislature, adequately paid legislators to be full-time legislators, we could draw upon a wider variety of people than currently serve, a more diverse group, but more importantly to your question, Representative, that there'd be more time available to those people to interact with the public, to answer emails, to be available to the public, because that would be their job, their one and only job. Well, I suppose they could have a part-time job doing whatever, but that would be their main function.
Let me ask as a follow-up. We do have specific statutes that require that I think the Attorney General, the Secretary of the State, and others devote all of their work time. Would you think that the legislators under the new system should be prescribed by law to only have that one position?
Yes.
Okay. Secondly, and I ask this of a member of the public, there's a check and balance function that takes place here. A bill will pass the House and or the Senate and may contain either drafting flaws, unintended consequences that are detected by the public, the press, or other members of the legislature. And then there's also the compromise that occurs between Senate and House members to try and produce the best piece of legislation possible that reflects the best consensus that can be reached at the time. Do you think that the check and balance system would be lost in a unicameral system, and it's something that would be detrimental to our process?
No, I actually think that the process would be refined and the quality of the process would be improved. We'd have more, one of the things I see, we could still save on staff, but we could have a better staff. Total numbers, but reduced, and more, as I said, more evaluation, more oversight, including of our own work. Bills, like in Congress, a bill doesn't die when we go into a new session, but we have 3 months. Like in the short session, bills die. Thousands of bills, tons and tons of time. People come in and, like at this hearing, and tons of time being spent. And then we do it again next year. Many of the same bills will come up again next year, and we'll do it all again, and those same bills will die. We could, to keep those bills alive and give the committees actual time to work on them through the summer into the fall, we could have a better product, and we wouldn't be as rushed to get those bills out. And obviously, we still have to get a budget out in time. We still have to have our finances in order to help because we have people depending upon us. We have a budget year that begins on July 1st. But I think the quality of legislation would be much improved over a period of time.
And lastly, I think I wanted to mention this for the record, that while the House of Lords in the United Kingdom doesn't have a very strong role, it does have a review and delay role, and if it doesn't put its mark on legislation, which it does once in a while, or actually it would have to be, I think they have a rule where if the House of Lords fails to pass legislation, it would have to be repassed by the House, and after a certain amount of time, the House of Commons, after a certain amount of time, it will become law. So it has a reduced role, but it does have a role in creating a check and balance. And you can comment if you wish, but I thought that was important to know that it's not completely dormant.
But we also have a governor who has a check and balance. I think that's the real check and balance. Legislature, executive.
Very good. Well, this has been very interesting, and I thank you. One of the reasons I thought it was important, we have a few questions, is that if this doesn't go forward very far this year, that somebody's going to be looking at this transcript if it comes back in the future. So I thought it was important to show what people were thinking at this time. If there's nothing further, we thank you for being here, Senator.
Thank you, and I hope it does go forward this year.
Okay.
Thank you very much.